Hey everyone, welcome back to InfoGamer. In this video, we're going to show you how to code our pause screen so that when you click the button, it pauses the game, and then when you hit resume, it returns to the game.
And we've already created the asset for the pause screen in a previous video, so if you haven't created it yet and you need a pause screen, make sure to watch that video first so that you can follow along on this video and have the assets to go along with the code that we create. Okay, so this is where we left off last time. In the last video, we left a pause screen active. And we're going to leave it active at the moment. So there's some things we need to adjust before we get into the code of the pause screen. Let's rename the score bar. It's still named image. Let's rename it score bar. Okay, and then when we put in the resume button to check our code, we couldn't click on the resume button because the score bar was actually covering the resume button. So let's unparent the score from our score bar, because when we adjust the size of our score bar, it's going to adjust the size of the score if it's still a child of the score bar. Let's click the sprite image folder, make sure we have that open, and click score bar. In the inspector, go to sprite mode and change single to multiple, then hit apply. Then we'll go to our sprite editor, and this is where we're going to actually change how much room the score bar takes up. We want to click and drag this box up to right about there and hit apply. And apply is again right here. This apply is probably the hardest to find in all of Unity. Alright, once we hit apply on that, it's going to stretch out our image all weird. Now let's select score bar in our hierarchy. Grab your anchors and drag the image up to around where we want it, and then zero out the rect transform. Cool, it's back to looking like normal. And then we can rechild the score to our score bar, and the score pops back in.
Now we're ready to add the buttons, and then we'll get on to coding the pause screen. So first we'll go up to Game Object, and then UI, and Button. Then we're going to rename it to Pause Button. And we're going to reposition this button over our pause icon on our score bar. And rescale it so it just fits right over top of it. Then we're going to expand our button in the hierarchy. And delete text because this button is going to be invisible. So we're going to click on button in the hierarchy, or our pause button, and then change our main colors alpha channel to 0. That's this black and white bar. Now we're going to child this object to our score bar. Now we're going to create the resume button for our pause screen. So go Game Object, UI, and Button. Then we need to rename it. We'll call it Resume Button. And we'll expand it and then delete the text. Now we need to go and find our Resume button in the sprite sheet. So we'll expand it, we'll scroll down, and it's right here. So we're going to select our Resume button, and then click and drag our resume asset, our sprite, into the source image. And then we're going to rescale it and reposition it so it looks good on our pause screen. And then we're going to child this button to our pause screen. So you should have one button that's a child to our score bar for our pause button, and then another button that's a child to our pause screen. Now we're ready to start coding.
Okay, let's go to scripts in our asset folder. Click game controller script. That should open up your MonoDevelop or your Microsoft Visual Studio. We're going to type in two public variables here. Okay, let's type public bool pause semicolon. And then on the next line, type public game object pause screen. This public bool pause is either false or true, and this is what is going to enable our pause screen, whether it's true or false. This public game object pause screen is the game object that we're going to initiate when our pause is true. Let's scroll down to the bottom. And Nathan, what are we going to type in here? We're going to add a pause function, right?
Yep. This is going to be a public function, and we want to make it public so that we can pair it up with our button. So we'll type public void pause function and then parentheses. Then we're going to open up the body of the function by typing curly braces. For the first line of this function, we're going to write pause equals not or exclamation point pause and then semicolon. What this line of code does is it toggles our bool to true or false. So if it's true, it'll become false, and if it's false, it'll become true. Now we need to write pause screen, which is our game object variable that we just created, dot set active, and then parentheses, and inside the parentheses we're going to write pause, then semicolon.
This next part's pretty cool. We're going to create an if and an else if statement. So let's start with our if, and we're saying if paused is true, then we're going to stop our game speed to 0. And how we do that is we type time.timescale equals 0 semicolon. And that is the end of our if the pause is true. Now let's do else if. So type else if parentheses, and in the parentheses is not true, which is exclamation mark pause. Let's open up the body of our if else, our else if. And in the body of our else if statement, this is going to be if the pause is not true. So it's not, the game's not paused. We're going to want to have the game time be 1, which is the normal game time. So it's going to be a lot like our if pause. Can you guys tell what we're going to put in here? We're going to put time.timescale equals 1 semicolon. Well, we're done with this function. Now we just got to make sure that this function gets run through when the button is clicked.
Now there's one last bit of code that we need to write. We're going to scroll up to where our score is being added in our group move function. And so we did this code in a previous video, but before we do score plus plus, we need to add an if statement that says if, and then in parentheses time.timescale is equal to, that's a double equals, 1.
Why do we got to type this in, Nathan? Why do we got to type it in here?
So we found that when our game was paused, the score would keep adding if our player was in the air, if he had a bit of hang time. And so we need to add this if statement to make sure that the score doesn't keep adding if our game is paused. So we say our score will only add if the time scale is equal to 1. So if it's equal to 0, it won't add. We need to add a couple curly braces to make sure that it contains the score plus plus and the score text dot text equals score to string.
All right, let's click on our game controller and drag our pause screen into the pause screen variable in the game controller in the inspector right here.
Now we need to connect our public pause function to the buttons. So first we'll click on our pause button, and then where it says on click down here in the inspector, we want to click the plus sign in the bottom right corner. Then we want to click on our game controller game object in our hierarchy and drag it into this none object field. And then this drop-down menu where it says no function, you can click on that and go to game controller. And then you should be able to see your public pause function. And that's how you pair a public function to a button. We also need to do this to our resume button. So we'll go and click on our resume game object and then do the same thing.
All right, before we hit play, we're going to have to set the pause screen to inactive, or else it's going to while you start playing, the pause screen is going to be up. So come over here to Inspector. While you have the pause screen selected, come over here to Inspector and select uncheck this right below the Inspector where it says pause screen. That will deactivate it in our hierarchy and give us the chance to activate it when our code is played. So let's hit play.
So our score's working, our game's working. Now if we hit the pause button in our game scene,
and it's not working. Alright, let's see what we did wrong. If we move this scene over, oh dang, look where our pause button is. It's not on our pause button. If we actually select in this area, it pauses the game. So what we didn't do is we didn't anchor our buttons. And when we adjusted the game view, it adjusted where our button was placed. So let's exit the game so we can make edits, readjust the button. Then we want to set our anchors and just click on the rect transform, this anchor box, select the far right bottom one. And once you do that, let's drag these anchors all the way over here too. This will keep our pause button exactly where we want it, no matter where we adjust the scene, because it's going to be anchored to our UI. We're going to need to do this with our resume button. Click on pause screen and open it up and click resume. Let's get the game pause scene open or up so we can see where our resume button is. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And then let's click here on our rect transform so we can anchor it. This puts the anchors at the corners. Let's click and drag the anchors right where we want them around the resume button. Sweet, we won't have any wandering buttons anymore. Let's hide not the resume button, but the pause screen again and hit play. All right, cross your fingers. We select the pause and the pause screen comes up. And it stops our score as well. Let's hit resume. And we can continue playing and our score continues to work. This was some pretty awesome code. It wasn't too difficult, but in the end, it did a lot. We are able to pause our game and go eat a sandwich.
pause screens are important because sometimes you got to run an errand or something comes up when you're in the middle of a game, but you don't want to lose your score because you're already got 1,000,000 points. You know?
Yeah, and then you drop your phone and it's like, oh crap.
Make sure that you like and subscribe. Click this button in order to subscribe. And stay tuned for all our future videos where we'll show you how to finish the game Doodle Jump.